We turn now to the SI.com college football analyst and a sideline reporter for Fox's college football coverage, fresh back from the Ohio State beatdown of Michigan State, 38-3 the final score there. Bruce Feldman, good to see you.
Good to be here.
So let's start. Let's start there. Where was that Ohio State team against Iowa?
They clearly were not focused on this same level. I mean, when we talked to Greg Schiano, especially the day before, their defensive coordinator, he was like, "This is a very angry bunch." They knew they had a lot to play for still, and they were unprepared. They were unprepared for Iowa, and I think they had a real chip on their shoulder. They completely shut down. Now, Michigan State's really young, and it's the first time in a while where they looked really young. Brian Lewerke, we had them the week before against Penn State, looked terrific in bad conditions, and they got punched in the mouth a couple of times, and they just didn't have any answers.
So Ohio State looking as good as it looks. Penn State, after falling down 6-0 to Rutgers, scored the final 35 to look like that. So all eyes on Wisconsin, correct, this week in the Big Ten community to see if they can beat Michigan and move forward to the Big Ten championship game and make some hay.
Yeah, they're well coached. We had them earlier in the year. It's hard to get a read on just how good they are because they haven't really played anybody. Their best win was just over Iowa. They completely shut them down. This is obviously a bigger test because Michigan has some real studs on their defense, especially. We'll see how Brandon Peters can play. But I think this is a really good Wisconsin team. They're really sound on defense. They got good defensive backs. What I really like about him is Jonathan Taylor, their freshman running back out of New Jersey. Now, this is a kid who almost went to Harvard. Great kid, big, has more speed than most of the Wisconsin running backs we've seen. Not like Michael Bennett, maybe, but some of these other guys who are more physical backs. He can go the distance. I want to see what he's going to be able to do against Don Brown's defense this weekend.
So then let's turn our attention to the ACC here because Miami just absolutely grabbed Notre Dame by the lapels and threw him down and then just beat him up. How good is Miami? Did we just see how good Miami could possibly be in your mind, Bruce?
You know, that was the best performance by far they've had all year because, yeah, they're undefeated. A little bit like Wisconsin until last weekend where they hadn't really been tested. They played FSU, who's a shell of itself without their starting quarterback, and they're falling apart.
And they needed a last-second win to pull that one off.
Right. They played a awful North Carolina team a couple of weeks ago. North Carolina's like 1-8. They barely beat North Carolina. But last week, Virginia Tech came in there, and they stomped them pretty good. And then this weekend, I think what they had was Miami has some really good athletes on defense. By the way, our old colleague from our ESPN days, Manny Diaz, I don't know if you remember him. Manny is Miami's defensive coordinator. He's done a terrific job there. I mean, they are really aggressive. They're really good up front. They're really athletic. I think the defense is probably 2 steps ahead of where Miami's offense needs to be. Miami has some skill talent, but it just doesn't have the same depth. But this whole, the turnover chain has gotten a lot of attention. But what you have is a team that is playing with such a chip on its shoulder. And I think a lot of people said, hey, Notre Dame's going to come in there and they're going to steamroll you because you're just not tough enough. And that was a challenge that the whole community there basically seemed like they took upon. And they, one of the Notre Dame coaches kind of called out the program. It got back in, right before the game. Miami responded. I don't know if they are. I think they're probably a year away from being a legit national title contender, but they may be on track the way they're playing. Their offense has been a pleasant surprise, and their defense is pretty nasty.
And Alabama just proved its mettle once again. I mean, that win in Starkville was really impressive. That was a spot where it looked from the jump one of those games on the road in the SEC at night, crowd going crazy, that was a night that they were going to get got, and they didn't. They won that game in impressive fashion, coming back to win that game. How in the world do they not give me the team that knocks them off, that has the best chance to beat them?
Auburn is playing really well right now. I mean, Auburn played a Georgia team that has a lot of talent, especially on defense, and Auburn just mauled them. Kerryon Johnson's a running back now who, for a second about the Heisman, it's Baker Mayfield's to lose. And
yes,
we talked about all these other running backs this year. Saquon Barkley is fantastic, but he has tailed off. Bryce Love from Stanford had a really remarkable season. Even Josh Adams from Notre Dame. All of a sudden now, Kerryon Johnson, who ran all over a Georgia defense that is loaded with NFL talent, and they blew them out. If he does something similar against Alabama's defense, which, by the way, is really banged up. They're down 4 linebackers. A couple of weeks ago, LSU, starting 2 true freshman offensive linemen, they ran the ball really well against Alabama. I think Alabama's definitely vulnerable. I just don't know if Auburn, which has been pretty wildly inconsistent, if they can respond well to the success and everybody now fired up about them, they have a chance to, I think, to knock off Alabama.
So we've got Bruce Feldman here on this edition of the Rich Eisen Show. Oklahoma plays Kansas, so let's give them another win. They're 10-1. And then comes the Big 12 championship game of the first time, or they have another game.
They have another game, but then
then they take on Oklahoma State again. Is that who they're going to take on again?
We'll see how this shakes out. I mean, because what you have now, it's kind of a mess in the Big 12. But Oklahoma, to me, now people are going to look and go, oh, well, they lost to Iowa State. Iowa State's actually pretty good. They were in the top 20 before. They beat TCU also. So you look at what Oklahoma has. Nobody has a better trio of wins on the resume than Oklahoma does. They really thumped Ohio State and Columbus. That was impressive. They beat Oklahoma State at Oklahoma State, their arch rival, and then this weekend beat a really good TCU team. Mm-hmm. People look at them and go, yeah, their defense is not very good, and whatever. They have Baker Mayfield. Right now, Baker Mayfield is the best player in college football, and he plays with so much confidence where he'd be a hard guy to bet against. I'm not sure if Oklahoma played anybody at this point, the way Baker Mayfield's playing, I wouldn't say, you know what, nobody is that much better than Oklahoma.
Well, he does look like the type of guy who would give Alabama fits, right? I mean, he gives anybody fits, but, I mean, you take a look at what Deshaun Watson looked like the last 2 years. Mayfield could present a similar issue for Alabama. The question is how this Final Four is going to shake up, and in the few minutes I have left with you, let's start supposing, I guess. So Wisconsin-Michigan's a big game. Then the ACC championship game, barring anything unforeseen between Miami and Clemson to get there, that's a huge game right there. Any chance that Alabama loses the Iron Bowl and then pulls an Ohio State? By that I mean they don't even play in the SEC championship game. Auburn and Georgia play each other. And then the Final Four sits down and they're like, okay, look, Auburn's terrific, tough spot, throw the records out in the Iron Bowl. Alabama's Alabama. We want everybody sitting down on the TV set and watch some of these games, unlike the last couple of years, we took a little bit of a bath on the ratings because if it was New Year's Eve, et cetera.
Right.
That they keep Alabama out or just say, we got to put them in there.
I definitely think there's a chance of that. Now, what you said a second ago was Alabama's Alabama. Nobody is getting the benefit of the doubt like Alabama does. Because if you look at their resume of what they've done, it's not loaded with great wins. Their best win was what they had this past weekend at Mississippi State. Mm-hmm. By the way, Mississippi State was blown off the field by Georgia, also this season. It's not like Mississippi State is a top 5 team. But
they had it together on Saturday night. They absolutely did.
They did, but LSU gave them a hard game the week before that, and outgained them and everything. So I think when you look at their resume, their 2 best wins are Mississippi State and LSU. If they lose to Auburn, it's not like they're going to have a great resume. They'd be 11-1. That Florida State win, that doesn't mean anything. Florida State is going to be lucky to get to a bowl game. So, Texas A&M, they beat them on the road. It was a close game. Texas A&M is barely above 500. So the resume itself is not that great, but I think the benefit of the doubt that they've had for being so good for so long,
yes,
I think that may carry them through depending on how some of these other things play out, because they're a one-loss team. You could get, if Ohio State looks the way they did in our game against Michigan State, does that, I think they'll crush Illinois, but then gets Michigan. And then if they beat an undefeated or even a one-loss Wisconsin team handily, I think Ohio State, despite getting blown out by an unranked Iowa team, I think Ohio State has a pretty good chance of making the playoff with 2 losses.
Look, I think what will happen this weekend is the Pac-12 just relinquished their seat at the table.
They're out. Okay, yeah.
So that means
Friday night was when Washington lost. I think that was it,
right? Exactly. So they relinquished their seat at the table here. So the Big 12 winner, the Big 10 winner, the ACC winner, and the SEC winner, they go unless somehow, some way, Auburn beats Alabama in a close game. Whoever wins that game in the SEC championship game gets a spot. And then Alabama at 1 loss gets in above, let's say, Wisconsin losing once before getting in or before getting into the Big Ten championship game and beats Ohio State, or Ohio State wins out with 2. It could come down to Ohio State winning out. They beat that school up north, as I try to be respectful, and then beats an undefeated Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. Could it possibly come down to a 2-loss Ohio State game under a team under that situation, and then Alabama, that's on the outside looking in, or Auburn on the outside looking in.
Yeah,
and they wouldn't do that though.
I don't know
right?
if Auburn has those wins down the stretch, how well they're playing. Auburn's 2 losses. They lost relatively close to Clemson, and then they lost because they were really dreadful in the second half at LSU. But I think, by the way, just to clear up the ratings point, I think the ratings point is an interesting one. If it's Ohio State versus Alabama, the committee can't lose there because they both are huge, huge TV draws. So I wouldn't, get caught up on that part of it in this case. But, it's like how well you're playing at the end. I mean, one team didn't win its conference, doesn't have great wins, and that's being Alabama. They only have 1 loss, whereas Ohio State, you've blown out twice, once at home, once by an unranked team. I'm curious how the committee would sort that out.
Okay, in the 90 seconds I have left with you here, Bruce Feldman, Chip Kelly to Florida, real, not real? What do you got for me on that?
I think there's a chance. I think Florida has real interest in him. They've been terrible on offense the last decade. To me, he's the most innovative, best offensive mind in football.
And Chip Kelly in the SEC would be phenomenal.
He would be. The only thing, and Florida doesn't have this as much as Tennessee. Tennessee has this really fishbowl quality of it, that if you're the head coach there, you got to deal with a lot of stuff. And a lot of guys don't want to deal with that. I don't think Chip Kelly would want to deal with that. At Florida, you don't have as much of that. But the thing is, Chip Kelly could load up on talent in that state. I mean,
in South Florida.
Yes.
And Florida and Northern Florida, all over the place.
I think what he has to consider is, if I pass on Florida, if I could get Florida and I don't take it, then where am I going to end up? Am I going to be the Nebraska guy? Is UCLA gonna spend a lot of money to get rid of Jim Mora? Is Arizona State come up? You don't know what's going to happen with Arizona State or UCLA.
What about Texas A&M?
I don't think Chip's a fit there. I mean,
or is someone going to lose his job?
I think Kevin Sumlin's. The AD there, Scott Woodward, made it clear he wants a change, and I think that's going to be a change. But a big positive for Chip that I think a lot of people overlook is you could get him at a cut rate because the NFL is paying him a lot of money with the Niners, so he is a bargain. And if I'm somebody else, and I'm like, man, and I'm in that conference, I don't want Chip Kelly coming in there. I mean, Chip Kelly's a great offensive coach. He's a very innovative, and I think kids it'd be a lot easier for him to recruit one of these programs than it is in Eugene, Oregon.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Always a pleasure.
Bruce Feldman here on The Rich Eisen Show. Mark Ingram of the Saints when we come back.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.